Are you here for the 9/11 event? Well, welcome. You're welcome to join us. We have some exciting news about what really happened to the World Trade Center on 9/11 and why we're here today. Is Bill Bernier here? Oh, right in front of my face.
Got to record this. How do I, Andy? Andy.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bill Bernier. I'm an architect from New York, and I came down here today because of the Bobby McElvain Act. I'm proud to introduce our host today, Richard Gage, AIA. He's a San Francisco Bay Area architect and member of the American Institute of Architects. He's the founding member of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Mr. Gage became interested in researching the destruction of the World Trade Center hearing startling conclusion by a reluctant 9/11 researcher, David Ray Griffin, on the radio in 2006, which launched his own unyielding quest for the truth about 9/11. AE 9/11 Truth now numbers more than 3,000 architects and engineers demanding a new investigation into the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center towers on 9/11. Please welcome Richard Gage, AIA.
Thanks everybody here, and thanks everybody at home, wherever you are at home. We have lots and lots of people watching live stream what's going on here, so our reach is far and wide, and we've been at it 12 years now, architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. And I want to ask you a question. Why are we standing right in front of the U.S. Capitol building? Great question, right? Yeah. We're relentless in our pursuit of the truth about the destruction of all 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11 and justice on behalf of the 9/11 family members. That's what brings us here together today on the 17th anniversary of 9/11. We need to be visible right here in front of our 535 members of Congress who were elected to represent us, but who so far have been negligent in seeking or willing to listen to the truth about what really happened on 9/11. We need to be here to make some powerful statements on behalf of the 9/11 Truth movement worldwide. And this message is being heard worldwide on live stream now. So today, we will hear from 9/11 victims' family members, technical and building professionals, the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, including Mr. Bill Bernier, Lionel from Lionel Media, Matt Campbell from the United Kingdom, and myself. You'll discover that the concerns of these representatives of thousands of others are deep-rooted, heartfelt, and honed by facing years of lies from government and media representatives. We come back this year yet again to Washington, D.C. to deepen our engagement with the gritty and long-enduring work of 9/11 Truth and Justice on behalf of those family members who stand with us. We represent them. Among the current ambitious efforts of the 9/11 Truth movement include our 3-pronged volley into the legislative, judicial, and executive branches of the United States government. Here at the legislative branch of our government, we at AE 9/11 Truth have launched and will sustain until we succeed the effort to get the Bobby McIlvaine Act for an investigation into the destruction of all 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers passed in Congress for a new investigation. The Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry have launched the effort in the judicial system with the filing to the U.S. District Attorney of a petition for a grand jury investigation of the same, using the evidence assembled by AE 9/11 Truth and presented now by AE 9/11 Truth to 550 live audiences and 600 radio interviews in more than 100 American cities and 30 foreign countries, reaching tens of thousands of sleeping citizens who are now waking up and creating the climate for a broader acceptance of this most inconvenient truth. And this month, the executive branch of the United States government has received a dose of 9/11 caffeine in the form of 26 letters from leaders in the 9/11 Truth Movement, assembled by Robert David Steele and hand-delivered to highly placed aides inside the White House to President Trump. We hope that his speech today in Shanksville addressed the concerns of these 26 leaders in the 9/11 Truth Movement. And we followed up this morning with an AE 9/11 Truth style protest. That's mild, and that's okay. That's our style. With our operations manager, Andy Steele, and Kelly David, our chief operating officer, who are out there with many of you. How many of you were out there at the White House today? All right, so we're going to hear from all about that from Andy at the end here. So Andy's at the Steele prompting supporters and bystanders and passers-by to remind President Trump of his promise. What did President Trump promise? He promised to find out who knocked down the World Trade Center. And as he stated in that address, or in another interview, we invite him to follow his hunch that there were explosives planted in the building. So at this time, I do want to let you know that at AE 9/11 Truth, we have a staff of 6 and dozens of volunteers that help us do everything that has to be done to get the truth out and to get a real investigation. I don't act alone. I never have. Well, I did in the beginning. But we've got a lot of help right now. 3,000 sustaining supporters giving the resources that we need every month. $5, $10, it goes up from there. And we're asking you to join the family of AE 9/11 Truth Sustaining members today. Also, wherever you are, go to the website, ae911truth.org. Join the family. Help the staff at AE 9/11 Truth do our job. Myself as CEO and president is more of a front-end operation where I try to get the word out like this and get the technical evidence out. But I'm supported by an incredible staff led by Kelly David, our Chief Operating Officer. Let's have a big hand for Kelly in the back. She's here today. And sitting next to her is Andy Steele, our Operations Manager. He does everything else almost that Kelly can't do by herself. But Ted Walter, our Director of Strategy and Development, is the brains behind most of the operations here. Ted Walter's here too. Let's give a big hand to Ted. Awesome. And at this point, I would very much like to introduce our first speaker. Lionel is not just a legal and media analyst. He's a trial lawyer, an author, a veteran talk show host, a podcast pioneer, and a logo datalist. I'll let him tell you what that means. Lionel is an intellectual known for his irreverent political and social humor. You'll get some of that today. He wears the mantle of Lenny Bruce with Lenny's own tropisms, the oblique, the irreverent, the tangential, the concupiscent, the polymorphous perverse, the arcane, the numinous. And yet, Lionel brings us to the table his own savory, a love of the mother tongue, and a gonzo vocabulary that puts his logo on all his works. Whether talk show hosting, stand-up, comment, spritzing, or hanging out with himself, a minor art form. Oh my God, I'm telling you, we are so honored to have Lionel here. He'll be talking about never apologize for asking questions about anything. He'll be discussing his unique experience in New York on that Tuesday morning, that fateful morning of 9/11, and how the event was his red pill moment. Lionel, come on up. Let's give a big warm welcome.
By the way, those were the words of Jerry Wexler, the great Atlantic Records founder. Those weren't my own as far as being numinous and concupiscent and the like. First of all, let me just say right off the bat that I represent no organization, no political party, nothing. I'm a member of nothing. I don't belong to a party. I hate politics. I'm a political atheist. I don't, if it, you know, the old line about if it has me as a member, I don't want to be a part of it. So I speak to you as an individual about to tell you what I've been saying for 17 years. The same speech, the same questions. And I must tell you what happened. 17 years ago today in New York, it was the most beautiful blue day you've ever seen. The sky was bluer than I've ever seen it before or since. No haze, no spraying, whatever, geoengineering, whatever the heck is out there. It was perfect. And at that same time, it was the worst day ever. I'm not going to tell you what others are family members. I'm not going to try to compete with my own horror. I wouldn't deign to try to even compete or say that I understand the horror that you went through. But it was surreal. And it changed my life from that moment. I couldn't believe what was happening. I thought everybody thought like I did. Foolish me. Well, let me tell you what happened. I was doing a talk radio show, one particular form or another, and I'm standing there, and somebody said to me, this is the actual moment. Somebody said, what do you think about, we're talking about Flight 93 or Shanksville. Now, I didn't know the moving parts. There's a lot of moving parts to 9/11. North Tower, South Tower, Building 7, the Pentagon, Shanksville, Iraq. People today still, firemen recently, just this past week, men contracting breast cancer because they were down there. So there's all these little aspects of it, the readiness. And so you pick the particular area because there is no one 9/11 story. Which one do you want? Which horror do you want? So anyway, somebody said, what about Shanksville? Flight 93. I said, what are you talking about? So I did like most people. I'm Googling pictures or whatever, and I'm looking because I'm looking for this event. It was still fresh in my mind. I didn't realize where these things were and what had happened. I didn't recognize the evidence that was collected at the time. I wasn't even aware of this. So I looked, and I saw, and I'm looking for a plane crash because they kept saying, there was a plane crash. I knew that. Let's roll, Todd Beamer. I heard about this. I'm not an expert in plane crashes. I'm not an expert in pregnancy either, but I can tell when I see one. I don't know death. I'm not a forensic pathologist. I can tell when dead people. I know a lot of things just from having lived. I think I know. I've seen pictures of accidents. So I'm looking through this Google Images, and I said, where's the plane? Just like that. Stupid me. No idea where I was heading. The rabbit hole for daring to ask, where was this plane that they're talking about? And I'm thinking, stupid me. Maybe I've got the wrong, I don't know where this is. I don't see it. I see this dimpled area. I see some steam. I see this plaque mark there. I don't know. Where is this plane? Where's the plane, the wheels and the wings and 6-ton titanium engines and the luggage carts and the people and the wires and the stabilizers and the... Nothing. Somebody called up. And this was that moment. This was the moment. I was asked, what are you getting at? I said, what? What are you getting at? What are you suggesting? What do you mean, what am I suggesting? The hell are you talking about? Where's the plane? There you go again. What do you mean? There I go again. Am I missing something? Are you part of a conspiracy theory? Now, I'm a criminal trial. I'm thinking conspiracy. No. Conspiracy is a confederation between two or more guilty people regarding something furtive, something criminal. No, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't understand the weaponization of the word yet. And I said, I'm just asking a very simple question. Where is this? Well, we were off to the races. And from then on, people said, this guy's a conspiracy theorist. I said, what are you talking about? When I'm asking a question. And I thought, am I the only one here? 17 years ago. We're still asking. I'm asking. They're not asking. Because this august body, look at what they are investigating. Look at what they have investigating. If it's sex related, if it's regarding certain presidents, no investigation too costly. But in the worst example of domestic violence or terrorism in this country's history, no time for that. We're busy. Next, this is the official story. Move on, little doggy. Stop asking questions. Move on. Now, you know, Tolstoy said history would be a wonderful thing if only it were true. And a lot of things would be a wonderful thing if only it were true. And Napoleon, by the way, said that history is a myth that men agree to believe. So we tend to believe these anecdotal things. We just say these things. We say over and over again. And I've been asking the longest time, could we please keep talking about this? And I was told, no, you can't. Well, I say, yes, I can. And we can. And you can ask any question you want about anything. Anything you want. This is America. I have to remind everybody that this is supposed to mean something. Everybody fought for my freedom and fought for my reason that I can say whatever I want. Well, I'm going to say this. You can't say that one. And now they're trying to weaponize this term. They're trying to weaponize this term to the point where they want you to just don't say anything. And somebody somewhere decides what it is that you're saying. And you all know the story, right? About the CIA memorandum. I know the CIA. Get your tin foil hats up. By the way, it's not tin. It's aluminum. We haven't worn tin in years. What are they talking about? But the word was weaponized in order to address after the Warren Commission, this fiction. And it was this idea of weaponizing these terms. Now, somebody then came up and said, are you a truther? This is how naive I was. I said, well, I could certainly hope so. This is a pejorative. I'm a factor. I'm a proofer. I want facts. I'm a lawyer. Before I get to who did it, I got to get to what it was they did. It's a simple question. When I was a homicide prosecutor, we had 4 types of death. The acronym was NASH, natural, accidental, suicide, homicide. When you walk in and you said, well, this poor woman is, look, God, she's handcuffed, shot 12 times in the back of the head. You know, I'm sorry to be gruesome, but as an example of this, I don't think this is accidental. I don't think this is suicide, and I don't think this is natural. I think this is probably homicide. And if somebody said, who did it? Why would they want her dead? What motive? I said, I don't even know how this happened. All I'm saying is that we need more of an investigation. And that's all we're asking. I'm a factor. And everybody wants to know why and who are the people. And with every great question, there are many people who have their own particular agenda, which is fine. Some people are very, very good in critical thinking, being able to lay out in a linear pattern the questions, the issues, the rules, the analysis, concluding. Others will jump in with their own particular agenda, and that's the way it is. You get that with a lot of people. But I am a factor. You know, Gore Vidal said, I love what he said. He said, I am not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a conspiracy analyst. And we're analyzing something because by virtue of the entire rendition of the facts that were presented to us, this was a conspiracy of terrorists or bad people, obviously. So we start off with the idea that this was a conspiracy. The question I want to know is, I want to keep going with this forever. I want to go until we are exhausted. I want to keep asking questions until every single question, nuance, has been addressed and has been exhausted. regarding this and anything for that matter. The Dow also said that one of these days it will be an article of faith that you cannot believe in something that is considered a conspiracy theory. That conspiracy theory will be replaced for the unspeakable truth. And I hope we never get to that. I'm telling you right now that this is the most critical thing, and I just want to be a part of any group, any place, whoever it is, who at least is together. I'm going to leave you with one thing. I've done so many radio shows in 17 years, and I thought by now people were going to be asking and understanding the issue of what happened. There's a lot of moving parts to this. And yet again, even as early as this morning, I'm talking to people who said, oh yeah? Well, who do you think did? I said, it's the what part first. We'll all get to this. But don't be embarrassed. Don't dare to ask any question you want. That's all I'm here to do. And I'm going to go on any platform, any program, anybody on a corner who at least says it's okay to ask. Now, let me leave you with this. If you think that this is some esoteric subject, that only this group of people are considered, if you think that the majority of people in this country are completely satisfied with all of the explanations, if you think that in New York, where I'm from, that the police and the firemen, the first responders, and those in the know, and those who were downtown, and those who knew people, if you think that they are completely satisfied with the official story that was presented, you've got another thing coming. So thank you for being here. Thank you for questioning, and never, ever ask for permission. It's your right as an American, period. Thank you.
Woo!
I'm always lifted about 4 feet out of my seat when that man opens his mouth. Thank you. We are blessed. So blessed. Well, guess what? Yes, I was one of the people invited to give a special note to our president. Yes, love him or hate him. He's our president. And I happen to have some hope myself because of the quotes that managed at least to slip out of his mouth that I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to let you in on a little secret, fella. Yeah, I'll let you in. Here's my letter. Mr. President, when you were campaigning for the presidency in Bluffton, South Carolina on February 15th, 2016, you told voters that under your watch, they would find out who really knocked down the Trade Center. And so we implore you, while you are now involved in exposing FBI corruption, to also investigate that agency's refusal to examine the explosive destruction of the 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11, buildings 1, 2, and 7. As you know, the events of that day are responsible for much of the worldwide carnage that continues to this day. Thus, 9/11 remains an issue of grave importance to the United States of America. The FBI has been made aware of the gross inadequacies of the investigations into 9/11 that have been carried out over the past 17 years by various official entities, including FEMA, NIST, and the 9/11 Commission. The FBI has also been made aware of the real investigative work being done by AE 9/11 Truth and others. In fact, in 2008, the then Assistant Director of the FBI's Counterterrorism Division, Michael Heimbach, praised our work, noting that it was backed by thorough research and analysis. Yet, 10 years later, here we are still with no credible investigation. Only a series of missteps and misstatements by FEMA and NIST, which we have documented in our 50-page booklet, Beyond Misinformation. What science says about the destruction of the World Trade Center's building 1, 2, and 7. When obtaining licensure, architects and engineers commit themselves to upholding their respective professions' code of ethics. The 3,000 architects and engineers that I represent are meeting this ethical obligation regarding 9/11. They're challenging the false assumptions and lies that have created an endless post-9/11 era in which $5.6 trillion have been spent by the U.S. government, which means you and me, on waging wars and implementing unconstitutional policies violating many of our civil liberties, which our forefathers fought for right here on this land where we're speaking. Here are some of the questions our architects and engineers are asking that remain unanswered and ignored by officialdom to this day. Why did World Trade Center 7, the third tower to collapse on 9/11, descend at free fall acceleration during its 7-second collapse? How is it that the videos show the 40,000-ton steel frame structure accelerating as fast as a bowling ball falling out of the sky? How was the 40,000 tons of steel columns removed in order to allow this to happen? Why does NIST now attribute the catastrophic collapse of Building 7 to a new phenomenon called thermal expansion due to normal building office fires, when office fires have never brought down a skyscraper, ever, even though there have been 100 much larger, longer lasting and hotter fires in these buildings? Why has the International Conference of Building Officials steadfastly resisted all proposed post 9/11 changes to the structural building codes? Regarding the Twin Towers, how did the elevated building mass of the upper section of each tower destroy the 80,000 tons of structural steel beneath at nearly free fall acceleration, as if the steel framing weren't even there? Given that open air jet fuel fires only burn about 600 degrees for their manufacture, and that normal office fires burn only at 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, what thermal energy source could have produced the several tons of molten metal observed flowing out of the South Tower shortly before its collapse? Seen and documented even by the World Trade Center structural engineer himself, Leslie Robertson. What explains the chemical evidence of thermite, an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter? Evidence found on the ends of the steel beams and in the pools of molten iron in the World Trade Center debris. In Appendix C of the Building Performance Assessment Report by FEMA in 2002, evidence of a severe high temperature corrosion attack on the steel, including oxidation, sulfidation, and melting of the steel. Why did NIST summarily dismiss this key evidence when its engineers took over the investigation from FEMA at that time? What was the source of the billions of previously molten iron microspheres well documented by the U.S. Geological Survey and R.J. Lee in the samples of the World Trade Center dust? Why didn't either of them explain how these microspheres got there in the first place? How did these microspheres come to contain the chemical signature of thermite, an incendiary material used by the military? Why did more than 100 first responders of the FDNY describe in great detail sounds of explosions and flashes of light immediately before each of the towers collapsed? What was the energy source that pulverized 400,000 cubic yards of concrete into a fine powder in midair? Why were virtually none of the 110 1-acre size 4-inch to 8-inch thick floors that were made of concrete and floor trusses found at the base of either of the towers? They were not found. Why were only 300 whole victims' bodies found? The 9/11 victims' family members represented here also want to know why there were 20,000 body parts small enough to fit into a test tube. And yet, absolutely no trace found of 1,149 victims, not even DNA. How were 4-ton structural steel columns ejected laterally from the Twin Towers at 70 miles an hour, landing up to 600 feet away after trailing thick white smoke clouds? Steel is not flammable. What's burning on the ends of these columns? What caused the 160 feet per second explosive ejections of pulverized building material 20, 40, and 60 stories down below the rapidly descending collapse of each tower? Why does the seismic evidence collected by Columbia University's Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory prove explosive demolition, not gravitational collapse, as the source of these seismic signals? Why did NIST claim that they found no evidence for explosives and then admit that they never looked for it? We've carefully documented all the above evidence in our video documentary 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out, which uses the basic physics and simple, rational forensic inquiry to expose the fraudulent nature of the official explanation of the World Trade Center destruction. In addition, we have publicly presented the evidence of controlled demolition to audiences in well over 100 U.S. cities and dozens of foreign countries. The response at these presentations has been stunning. After hearing us recite the facts, at least 85% of those in attendance who initially believed the official story of fire-weakened steel changed their minds and decided to support our theory, backed by evidence of explosive destruction with incendiaries and explosives, and agree with our call for a new independent investigation with subpoena power. The body of clear scientific evidence that we present has been vetted by our more than 3,000 building and technical professionals, hundreds of physicists, chemists, and other science-based experts who have signed our general petition. So compelling is the evidence that we were invited to be interviewed on C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Since airing its August 2014 episode, our 40-minute interview has become the most watched video on the entire C-SPAN website, with more than 1 million views. This deeply incriminating evidence raises urgent concerns for our country's counterterrorism law enforcement and public safety professionals. Indeed, the evidence by Joel Hirshhorn, PhD, a senior staff member of the Congressional Office of Technology Assessment, admonished, first, let the technical truths emerge, then, if necessary, cope with the inevitable political and conspiracy issues. Mr. President, AE 9/11 Truth's top representatives are here to meet with you. We are determined to fulfill our patriotic duty to obtain justice for the 9/11 families and to ensure the future safety of our fellow Americans. We have the technical expertise to defend your public assertion that there were explosives planted in the building and responsible for the criminal destruction. Humbly, we offer ourselves in service to your mission of making America great again by supporting the 9/11 victims' family members' demand for a real investigation. Respectfully, Richard Gage, AE 9/11 Truth. So that went with 26 other similar letters. And yes, the FBI did write us back. And so we're going to be all over them with yet another lawsuit. And that is forthcoming because they did not follow up on it. Did I give Matt my introduction to Matt?
I don't have it.
You don't, just the family member statements you have. Okay. Be that way. I'm just going to find it. With us today, all the way from Great Britain, merry old England, is Matt Campbell, brother of Jeff Campbell, who died on the 106th floor of the North Tower on the morning of 9/11. He has spent more than 12 years dealing with lies from both the US and Great Britain governments in an effort to obtain justice not just for his brother, but for all 3,000 who died on 9/11 and for their families who continue to back Matt in his effort, along with other family members like Bob McIlvaine and so many others, all the way from Great Britain. Let's give a warm welcome to Matt Campbell.
Thanks, Steve. 17 years ago today, my brother Jeff was murdered. As Richard said, he was on the 106th floor of the North Tower. He was attending a Risk Waters conference. There was once 3 Campbell brothers, and now there's only 2. And I miss him. We all do. This year, I am pleased to be a signatory of the Grand Jury petition and the Bobby McIlvaine Act. Whenever the authorities are involved in murder and its subsequent cover-up, it's only through the determination and perseverance of family members and individuals that truth and justice can have any chance of prevailing, even when the chances of succeeding appear so slim. I'd like to give you an example of what inspires me. Over 46 years ago, in Northern Ireland, 28 civilians who were on a protest march were shot by the British Army. 14 people died, 6 of whom were only 17. The youngest injured was only 15. That day in Derry, Northern Ireland, in 1972, became known as Bloody Sunday. A few months ago, I had a long chat with one of the victim family members of Bloody Sunday. Her name is Julianne Campbell, no relation. She lost her uncle, Jackie Duddy. She was also the press officer for the Bloody Sunday Justice Campaign. And she wrote this book called Setting the Truth Free, the inside story of the Bloody Sunday Justice Campaign. And I'd like to take this opportunity to mention some of the parallels, because I think they're interesting between 9/11 and Bloody Sunday, some of which I've personally experienced myself. For example, how the media, politicians, successive governments close rank when challenged about official narratives, and how they basically choose to ignore you. Bloody Sunday had the Widgery Tribunal, which was an inquiry led by the Lord Chief Justice Widgery. And this is the highest, at the time, it's the highest legal authority individual in the country. The report he produced largely cleared the soldiers and British authorities and instead blamed the march organisers and claimed that all the victims were either gunmen or bomb throwers. Not a single eyewitness testimony was considered other than that of soldiers. The cover-up began hours after the shootings, beginning with the captain of the regiment compiling a shot list, which was a fraudulent list identifying the victims as either gunmen or nail bombers. The very next day, the Prime Minister, Ted Heath, met with the Lord Chief Justice and reminded him that as well as a military war going on in Northern Ireland, there was a broader war going on and that he should do his duty. Even when the report was being drafted, someone wrote by hand on a copy that the Lord Chief Justice will pile up the forensic evidence against the deceased. Now remember, this is supposed to be an independent and fair inquiry. So when the Widgery report was published and all the victims were labelled as terrorists, Bloody Sunday became a catalyst for a massive increase in the troubles both in the UK and in mainland UK and Northern Ireland. We're 17 years on now. I take inspiration and hope that for the Bloody Sunday victims, the families didn't really get together in terms of campaigning for truth and justice until 20 years after the event. And they campaigned for a new inquiry, the quashing of the widely discredited Widgery report, and to give the victims their innocence back because they were labelled as terrorists. On the 20th anniversary, a book was published, this is in 1992, a book was published by a journalist, an activist, and now Irish politician called Eamon McCann. And this, along with the effort of many individuals and campaigns, resulted in Tony Blair, the then Prime Minister, in 1998, announcing a new inquiry. An inquiry that actually led to the former Prime Minister, Ted Heath, taking the witness stand and being examined, and also the captain who compiled that fraudulent shot list, who at the time of the new inquiry was head of the British Army. 12 years later, seems an awful long time, it's nearly 4 decades on, in 2010, the original inquiry was quashed and the victims exonerated. The report's findings were made public and that the actions of the British Army were ruled unjustifiable and unjustified. And only after the publication were the police, I mean, get this, only after the publication, 40 years on, were the police allowed to investigate the crimes for the very first time. The prosecution services is, as we speak, 46 years on, assessing what legal criminal action can be taken. And as Ted Walter said to Julianne in a recent visit to the Bloody Sunday Museum in Derry, the 9/11 Commission report is our Widgery. And I'd just like to finish off with just reading, it's almost the last page of this book. And it's Eamon McCann, the activist, the journalist, the politician, the Irish politician, reflecting on the campaign. Nothing mattered as far as the families were concerned, as long as they won their loved ones' innocence. In the process, however, they have become emblematic of the need for people to persist in campaigning for truth and justice. In the end, that might be the legacy of the Bloody Sunday Justice campaign. The extent to which it enables people elsewhere faced with impossible odds to look at the Bloody Sunday campaign and say of their own campaign, let's keep on. This might just fucking work. So let's keep on. Thank you. I've been asked to read out some statements from other family members. You can see the victims behind me. But first of all, I'd like to reread a letter, a talk that Bob McIlvaine gave 2 years ago. connecting the dots of 9/11. Since Bobby's death on 9/11, I have been on a journey to find the truth of how and why he died and who really killed him. I was not satisfied from the beginning with the official story of his death. I also feared that violence around the world would escalate as a result of this horrendous act. In 2002, I joined September 11th Families for Peaceful Tomorrows, a group of activists whose name was inspired by a Martin Luther King statement: "Wars are poor chisels for carving out peaceful tomorrows." In the early part of the new decade, we marched hand in hand for peace in Washington and New York, hoping that 9/11 would not be a justification for increased war efforts. I'll never forget the moment when I was arrested on the Capitol lawn, proudly carrying a banner stating "Not in my son's name," which referred to the use of 9/11 by Bush to further any war efforts. Later at the World Conference on Victims of Violence in Bogota, Colombia, I told Bobby's story to a packed audience of survivors of various atrocities. I was honoured to have the opportunity to share my pain and grief with those who truly understood the price of violence. Back in the United States, I regularly attended the 9/11 Commission hearings, patiently listening to testimony while hoping to find answers to an official story that continued to make little sense. Instead, I felt frustrated with the inability of the Commission to discover anything new or enlightening. Witnesses, including Condoleezza Rice, were not accountable to the Commission or the American people. Miss Rice, to my dismay, filibustered her way through each of the questions posed by the commissioners. I returned home very discouraged. In 2005, on the 60th anniversary of the atomic bombing, I was asked to join Peaceful Tomorrows on a march from Nagasaki to Hiroshima, honouring those who have died in war. I walked beside Hibakushi survivors of the attack. They showed amazing pride, never taking on the role of victim, though many were treated as outcasts by their own people. The Hibakusha's courage impressed me in the need to continue my quest for peace and truth. I returned home deciding that if the US government was not going to give me the real answers to 9/11, then I'd find them myself. Why, I wondered, was it so hard to go against the government's version of a story that did not make sense? I wanted to know why the media always seemed as far from a free press as one could imagine, often ignoring obvious breakthroughs in information. Why also did peace seem even further away than before 9/11, frustrating the peace community? Our children died that horrible day, and it was now being used as fodder for more escalation, more deaths. My quest for truth took me to both the traditional history sources as well as books written by outstanding authors who questioned the company line. I sought deeper answers than that was offered in the news or in press conferences. As I searched, quotes by Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Franklin Roosevelt, which I'd initially primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. Fascinated with these predictions by such stellar leaders, I began to probe further, seeing patterns, taking a harder look at the circumstances leading to the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. I looked further back in history, reading about Operation Gladio and the Gulf of Tonkin in a different, more knowledgeable light. Was 9/11 another false flag? I was beginning to see the truth. I wondered if presidents truly had any power to wage peace. Were special interest groups with unimaginable wealth and power, who are often referred to as the shadow government, controlling the decisions of war? After more continued research, I learned that these clandestine operatives would never allow the control of government to the people. They would instead rely on disinformation. Weapons of mass destruction is a perfect example. Fabrication of injustices and the spreading of propaganda to justify their aggressive acts. Could these elite few be responsible for the upheavals in so many countries when it appeared to the general public that we were in those countries to promote democracy? As I continued my reading, I recall a quote by Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister. You tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people eventually come to believe it. He went on to say that the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus by extension, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state. Sadly, I came to a conclusion best said by Woodrow Wilson, and unfortunately true today. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of small groups of dominant men. From hours and hours of research, I have learned that the truth of 9/11, as well as the truth regarding who really holds the power in this country and throughout the world, are not in our best interest to know, according to those elite few who choose to control our destiny. Unfortunately, peace and truth are not part of that destiny. I understand where Bob's coming from in that last line, and I mean, world peace is probably quite a high goal and quite tricky to achieve, but yeah, I do believe that truth can be part of our destiny. I'd like to read out some statements from some family members on behalf of them. This is from Drew De Palma, the son of Jean De Palma. The loss of my mother is something I struggle with to this very day. Nothing prepares you for the death of a parent, especially when they are taken away from you in such a horrific and unprecedented manner. My mom was the most loving, smartest and hardest working woman I've ever known. Her principles are instilled in me, and I hope she is proud of the man that I have become. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't think about her and the good times we shared. She would have loved being a grandma, and it deeply saddens me that she never got a chance to meet my children. I always hope that justice would be served, and perhaps to some extent it has, but there are still parties that have yet to be held accountable. As a country, we shouldn't rest until the entire truth is uncovered about how the attacks were carried out and who was involved. This is from Barbara Krukowski-Rastelli, the mother of fallen firefighter William E. Krukowski. I am the mother of firefighter William E. Krukowski, who was murdered on September 11, 2001 in the World Trade Center attack. Here we sit 17 years since that tragic day of September 11th, 2001, and efforts are still being made to come to some understanding of what happened on that awful day. The architects and engineers only want to be heard with the evidence that they have discovered and compiled. The loss of my only son, William Edward Krukowski, seems like the attack of September 11th was only yesterday. Like many family and friends who loved loved ones, that awful day is lived over and over until I and they are no longer on this earth. I would like to know the truth before I leave this life. This is from George Steen, the brother of Eric Steen. I have lost my brother and cousin and many friends in the towers. 17 years have passed without any real investigation by our government. Why was the steel removed and sent to China? To clear the evidence of controlled demolition, eyewitness testimony of explosions going off on various floors of the building, and the smoking gun, of course, is Building 7. The evidence has been compiled, and it points directly to prior knowledge and wiring explosives of some kind in all three buildings. A real investigation is long overdue. I want justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Well, we're still in good company. there's another architect among us. One who lost his best friend on 9/11. Bill Bernier is a New York architect. His best friend was Frank DiMartini, the construction manager at the World Trade Center, who was working on the 88th floor when the tower was destroyed. Now, Frank described in a major documentary that the steel in the tower, for which he was the construction manager, was an intense grid of marching perimeter columns every 3 feet 4 inches all the way around the tower. And each floor being an acre in size, these towers were huge, and they could take a hit from an airliner, puncturing it, and it would be like a pencil going through a screen door. It can handle it. Bill Bernier will share his personal journey as an architect and pilot, from blind acceptance of the official 9/11 narrative to questioning it, and to now actively challenging it, in his support for the Bobby McIlvaine Act for a new investigation. Please give Bill Bernier a warm welcome.
Thank you, Richard. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to see all of you. Come to hear many of us speak about the events of 9/11 and how we are marching forward, seeking the truth. On the morning of 9/11, I was working in South Jersey and commuting there from my home in Rockland County, which brought me down Palisades Parkway onto Route 80 and then on down the New Jersey Turnpike, which had a stunning view of the World Trade Center. And as I passed beneath the overpasses of Route 80, coming onto the Jersey Turnpike, the World Trade Center came into view. This was a few minutes after 9. And the North Tower looked like a chimney. Now, my friend Frank, who had been at the World Trade Center since 1993, he hired on with Leslie E. Robertson, who was the one of the structural engineers from the original design of the building, and whose company had the contract to maintain the structure. They were looking for an architect member of the damage assessment team to investigate the bombing of 1993. And Frank applied for the project and was accepted. He was a dynamic fellow and easily likable. They took him on, and I was fortunate enough to, get tours of the damage zone from that bombing, which was phenomenal. That bomb, which was in a truck that was parked down in the basement, destroyed 4 of those massive columns in the center of the building. Now, this is down in the basement where those columns are as big as they get. They're really thick. And they were completely blown away. There were 4 of them missing. And the tower's structural integrity was still intact. They were soon replaced, and the building was put back together, and we mourned the 6 people who were killed in that attack, and life went on. So when I came around that corner and I saw that chimney, I said, oh my God, here we go again. And I got on my cell phone, I called Frank, he was not picking up. I called his wife, who was also working at the Trade Center. She wasn't picking up. And I continued down. I didn't know what to do. I was listening to Imus in the Morning, who was a local radio host, who was on the radio at the time, and he didn't hear about it until about 2 or 3 minutes later. Suddenly someone told him what was going on, so now it was on the radio, and I was hearing about the attack. It looked like they said it. I don't know if it's an attack or what. Maybe a small plane hit the World Trade Center. So we're getting a blow-by-blow description as I drove down the Jersey Turnpike. And as I got to exit 18, which is where you pick up your ticket, scan in or whatever, to head down the Turnpike, I saw the South Tower explode. This yellow flames, this giant. I was like, holy smokes, what is going on here? And then they reported it and so forth and so on. And I continued on down to the work site that I was at the Jersey Shore. I was working on a high-rise residential tower up on the 9th floor. So I kept going downstairs into the basement where there was a break room for the building employees. And they were watching the television. So every once in a while I go down and check on what was going on. And at one point I went down a little after 10 and they said, oh my God, you're not going to believe this. The South Tower completely collapsed. And I was incredulous. I said, this is impossible. These buildings are not built so that a plane could take them down. And mind you, I was very close with Frank and was well aware of the fact that he had approached the History Channel to create a documentary about the history of the World Trade Center. It was supposed to be his 15 minutes of fame. And they produced it in January of 2001. And it was supposed to air on the History Channel in June of 2001. Didn't air. There was a problem, so then it was going to air again in August. It was another problem. It didn't air. And they said, oh, we'll definitely do it in September. And September 11th came and went. And they did air it in October in a completely different light. And that's when Frank made that comment about how the skin of the building was an intense grit. And it really essentially did nothing to the structure. The structure was so immense and so fortified that the loads would find their way around that little hole in the building and make it down to the ground. I had, over the years, had many tours of different parts of the Trade Center, thanks to Frank and my relationship with Frank, and had seen, the basement structure, had seen the slurry wall that they built. I mean, the World Trade Center was built in basically what assembled or constituted a swamp. And the Hudson River would basically flood the whole basement area. And they created this giant slurry wall, which basically created a huge 16-acre bathtub. And what they did is they injected concrete into the cement or into the earth. And so it created this amorphous, almost looked like you were in a cave. You go through these brick walls and suddenly that were perfectly symmetrical and you come across this wall that looked like you were in a cave. And that was the slurry wall that held back the Hudson River and created the footings and the base for the World Trade Center, all the way up to the top where the hat trusses were that held the whole, those outside walls that went up and the inside walls that went up were tied together again at the top. They were also tied together at the sky lobbies. There were two sky lobbies. The main one was on the 78th floor. So I understood that these buildings were built to withstand 140-mile-an-hour winds. I mean, a building that size, the force of 140-mile-an-hour wind, which is hurricane force wind, on the entire side of that building was a tremendous force. And these buildings, they just swayed. They just swayed a little bit. Okay, the bathroom, the toilets on the top floor had the water sloshing around in them on a windy day, but people got used to that. So I knew how strong they were. I knew that it was impossible that could happen. So I had this strong feeling that day something was fishy. And yet there was this barrage of information, quote unquote information, that was broadcast on all the mainstream media, radio, television, magazines, newspapers, you name it. It was nonstop. We were hit with this barrage telling us what happened that day. And slowly but surely, in my grief at losing Frank, I started to say, well, maybe they're right. Maybe it's true. Maybe that it's possible. These buildings could knock down like that. So I kind of fell into a depression and went along with the flow for about 2 years. And then I started to say, wait a minute, if Frank were alive today, would he accept all of this? Would he just go with the flow? He wasn't that kind of guy. He was a really special individual, full of energy and full of spark. And as Lionel said, a man not afraid to ask questions and a man who seeks the truth. And I said, I'm going to start looking into this. So I went online and I started to investigate. And it took about 2 years before I really came to the conclusion that I was right in the beginning, that something was up, that it could not possibly have been the forces that we were told knocked down these buildings. And immediately, anytime I would talk about this with anybody, I was labeled a conspiracy theorist, which used to piss the heck out of me. I was so upset to be called that. Because as Lionel said, that's not what I was all about. I was asking questions. I wanted to know what happened that day. And I think it is human nature for people to say, when you tell them that you have a question and that you think maybe what we've been told by our government isn't really spot on, isn't the truth, that it doesn't square with the evidence on the ground, with what we saw that day. I mean, we're told that it was a gravitational collapse that brought down these 210-story buildings. To me, I looked at it and I saw explosions. I saw buildings going up and out, not straight down in a gravitational collapse. It didn't make sense then. It doesn't make sense now to believe that what we're told was the cause of the collapse of these buildings actually brought them down. There had to be something else. So slowly, I started to find information online. I started to read books. I was a vociferous reader of anything that anybody. I read David Ray Griffin, which was the fellow who got Richard Gage intrigued and starting to ask questions. And boy, did he get me asking questions. And this is a theologian. This is not just any old schmo off the street. He's a PhD theologian. And he made sense. And it really rocked my world to listen to that, to hear that, to read that. And I eventually found Richard Gage, this little 2-bit operation. I don't think there were 300 members. He's looking for architects and engineers who had questions to sign his petition, asking for a new investigation. I said, that's me. That's me. I got to do it. So I signed up. And in 2008, I began to really get involved and to be part of the truth movement, the search for the truth of what happened that day. I lost two younger brothers in their 20s, and I thought that was about as hard as it could be. But when I lost my best friend of over 30 years, a guy I spoke to every day, I shared my deepest concerns and my thoughts and my fears and my joy with. And he was gone. I was looking forward to growing old with this guy, and I'm not going to get that opportunity. And at my age, I don't think I'm ever going to find a guy quite like that I can go through life with and share those experiences. So I have great grief, and I have big questions about what happened that day. And as we march forward, little by little, I worked with Ted Walter on the New York City 10 ballot initiative. We had 2 failed attempts to get a ballot, a local ballot. Hey, this happened in New York City. Don't you think that New York City should take the role and investigate this problem? Well, it was taken away from them by these people. Our federal government called it an act of terrorism, which basically plucked it away from New York City. They didn't have any rights whatsoever to the investigation. And by calling it an act of terrorism, it just wiped out all of our ability to go after the truth on a local level. So that's why we're here now. That's why we're looking at the judiciary, we're looking at the executive, and we're looking at the legislative. And the Bobby McIlvaine Act is something that, hey, we don't stand a ghost of a chance, but if we just keep pressing, if we just keep pushing. Ralph Nader was this one little guy, and he got upset about how unsafe our automobiles were back in the 60s. And one little guy working tirelessly gave us airbags, gave us seatbelts, gave us automobiles that are a heck of a lot safer than they were back then. And he says his contention is that a mere 10% of the population that fight for something is going to make a huge difference. 25%, that means 75% don't favor it. 25% will win. If we can get to that point, if we just keep pushing, if we just keep it up, as they did in England and Northern Ireland, to get that investigation, eventually we're going to get it. So I'm here to say, hey, let's support the Bobby McIlvaine Act. Let's and keep up. It's 17 years. I don't care if it takes 50 years. Until the day I die, I will not put down the mantle. I'm here to continue to fight. Thank you.
And this is why we have the Bobby McIlvaine Act for the investigation of the 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11. This act is based on the Benghazi Act, and it will impanel a select committee in either the House or the Senate to investigate the towers. All it takes is one congressperson to introduce this bill, which has been prepared for them, just like the FDA, when Merck wants a bill that favors them, they write it. They give it to the FDA. There are people in the FDA, and on through every industry. Well, we're becoming an industry too. The 9/11 Truth Movement is growing worldwide by millions. And they're a more silent bunch. But we're here today now to fan out in 6 groups into the Senate office buildings surrounding the Capitol. And we're going to get organized. We're going to do that right now. And we're going to head on out. So I'd like to call up our operations manager, Mr. Andy Steele, and we're going to get coordinated. So we're transitioning here into our business meeting, which is going to last about 3 minutes. Now, come on up, Andy. How many of you are here to help Andy and I fan out? And we're going to be visiting congresspersons with handouts. And Mr. Andy Steele, Operations Manager, 18911 Truth. Tell them the rest of this fantastic story.
Events like this are great for bringing together all the people who have wakened up to this issue. It brings us together to charge our batteries, to get our energy going, but we really have to take this energy beyond days like this, out into the rest of the year, out into the rest of the country, and do that daily work. You know, I heard something one time on old-time radio talking about World War II, different war than we're in right now, saying it's the small things done well every day that are going to win the war for us, and that applies here to 9/11 Truth. And we're going to get started today by reaching every single member of Congress. We have packets ready for them, and we're going to be distributing them, so we're going to need some volunteers here today. I know we got some great ones here that I know who are going to be helping us out, and this is just the first step towards what we're going to be doing this year to get this bill passed. And I want to thank Richard Gage, all our great speakers here. Let's give them another round of applause. Step up, help out, and then we're going to see you later at Busboys and Poets.
Do we want to bring up our team members so we can get people assigned to teams? Go ahead.
Sure. So, staff, right?
Yeah, we got 16 members, leaders.
Right.
So whoever they
well, we're going to be assembling after this is over. But,
right now.
Right.
Yeah. So we need 16 able-bodied people to stick around, and we will organize.
Let's just can't take my bag in.
Yeah.
Come on up.
So if you can help us, come on up.
Can't.
We'll get you assigned to one of 6 teams. Who are the team leaders, Andy? Did you name them?
We're actually assembling them right now.
Oh, well, we don't have team leaders assigned. Oh, okay. Well, Diana will be one. How about that? And Andy, you're a team leader too, right? Andy's got one team. Let's bring up the packets. Ted, you're going to be a team leader? All right, Ted's one team leader. Frank's a team leader. And Carl's a team leader. And we're going to talk about where to go. We need the microphone to talk about where to go. So, how many of you would like to join? Will help today. First of all, would you raise your hand?